Ilia Malinin walked onto the Olympic Gala ice on February 21st, not in a sequined costume, not with an upbeat, crowd-pleasing routine prepared, but in a gray hoodie and frayed jeans with the word fear written upside down on his sweatshirt. And nobody in that arena was prepared for what came next. 8 days earlier, on February 13th, he had stood at his starting pose in the men's singles event in front of millions of people and felt his legs turn to stone, felt his breath disappear, felt traumatic thoughts flood his mind in real time, and lost control completely on the world's most scrutinized stage while the entire planet watched and expected perfection. He skated his gala solo to the song Fear by NF, an American rapper whose lyrics deal specifically with mental health struggles and the sensation of losing control. And what Malinin delivered was not a figure skating performance in any conventional sense of those words, but a full visual reconstruction of exactly what a mental breakdown looks like from the inside. He mimed scrolling through hate comments. He flinched from imaginary cameras. He pulled his hood over his head. He physically acted out every component of the psychological collapse that had happened on this same ice just 8 days before. And he did it in front of 12,000 people, with the word fear displayed upside down on his chest, because fear had been the thing controlling him. When he spoke to journalists after the performance, he said that what he skated was just an extension of the emotions he had been carrying for the entire year leading up to these Olympics. And then he said something that every sports federation, every national program, and every coach who has ever prioritized results over a human being should be required to read. He said it had been so stressful, so much pressure from people, the noise, the media, the thoughts, and that it is something no athlete should ever have to go through. And those words, coming from a two-time world champion who had just publicly visualized his own psychological destruction on Olympic ice, carried a weight that no press release or mental health awareness campaign has ever come close to matching. Olympic galas are supposed to be celebrations. They are designed as low-pressure, joyful events featuring flashy costumes and upbeat music, where the medalists perform without judges and the crowd enjoys the spectacle of elite athletes free from the burden of competition. And Ilia Malinin turned the entire format into a therapy session broadcast to the world. No Olympic athlete in the history of the Games has ever done what Malinin did on that ice, which is return to the exact venue where a public breakdown occurred and use their athletic platform to visually reconstruct and process that breakdown in real time in front of the global audience that witnessed the original collapse 8 days prior. He finished 8th in the men's singles event, which under normal circumstances would have placed him outside the primary solo performance rotation that typically features the medalists and the highest finishing competitors. But Olympic organizers made a specific exception for Malinin because his star power, his team gold medal, and the unfinished story from February 13th made his presence at the gala something the world needed to see. The decision to invite him, despite his individual result, was correct in every possible sense, because what he delivered in that gray hoodie became the single most discussed and most culturally significant moment of the entire 2026 Milano Cortina Winter Games, regardless of every gold medal ceremony that preceded it. After acting out the scrolling through hatred, the flinching, the hiding, the breakdown, Malinin did something that shifted the entire emotional register of the performance in a single violent instant. He landed a quadruple jump, then unleashed his signature move, the backflip with a one-footed landing that had been banned in competitive figure skating for nearly 50 years before the International Skating Union finally legalized it in June 2024. The crowd went absolutely wild, not because the technical execution was impressive, though it was, but because everyone in that building understood that a man who had just visually reconstructed his own psychological collapse then immediately demonstrated the exact physical capability that makes him the most dangerous jumper in the history of the sport.
NBC commentator Tara Lipinski, who knows better than almost anyone alive what Olympic figure skating pressure actually does to a young athlete, said live during the broadcast that this experience will fuel Malinin even more, and the way she said it communicated something that statistics and rankings cannot capture, which is that athletes who survive public collapse and choose to confront it rather than hide from it come back operating at a different level of psychological depth. When he finished the routine, he appeared visibly emotional. The arena saw the full weight of what he had been carrying for the previous 8 days and the previous year, and the standing ovation he received was not for his quadruple jumps or his backflip, but for the bravery it takes to stand in front of the world and tell the truth about what pressure actually does to a human being. Then came the moment that left the entire arena completely silent and sent every person watching at home reaching for their phone to describe what they had just witnessed, because at the end of the performance, Malinin mimed putting on headphones, tugged them over his ears, and the music cut to immediate absolute silence in a 12,000-seat Olympic venue. He stood at center ice in total silence, symbolically shutting out the online hate, the media scrutiny, the noise of 10,000 strangers who felt entitled to judge and destroy a 20-year-old athlete who had given everything he had to a sport since childhood, and the entire arena sat in silence, watching him reclaim the peace that the machine had taken from him. That silent ending was not a gimmick. It was not a choreographic flourish designed to make the performance more theatrical. It was the most precise and economical possible communication of something that cannot be put into words, which is the moment an athlete decides that the noise of the outside world no longer has permission to enter the space where they perform. He said afterward that he was taking control back, that he was shutting out everything that had broken him, and the fact that 12,000 people sat in complete silence watching him do it, rather than filling the moment with applause, tells you everything about how clearly that message transmitted to every single person present in that building. This was not goodbye, and it was not a farewell performance designed to process trauma before stepping away. It was explicitly and unmistakably a warning, delivered on the same ice where the collapse had occurred. Because immediately after the gala, Malinin confirmed what comes next, and the answer is the World Championships in Prague on March 23rd through the 29th. He is going to defend his world title. He is a 2-time world champion, having won in both 2024 and 2025, and he described it himself not as a comeback, but as a redemption competition, a specific word choice that tells you exactly how clearly he understands the difference between returning to competition and returning to competition with something to prove.
The last figure skater to win 3 consecutive world championships was Nathan Chen, the American legend who accomplished that specific feat from 2018 through 2021 and whose name sits at the absolute summit of modern men's figure skating legacy. And Malinin is now 6 weeks away from attempting to put himself in the same category. He will arrive in Prague having experienced the most publicly devastating moment of his career on the biggest stage the sport has, having processed it visually in front of the world 8 days later, and having announced his return with a performance that every competitor watching understood was not the behavior of someone who is broken, but the behavior of someone who is dangerous. The timeline of what Malinin accomplished between February 13th and February 21st is something that sports psychology textbooks will reference for the next 50 years because he went from a public breakdown that was dissected and criticized across every platform on the internet to the most powerful mental health statement ever delivered on Olympic ice in 8 days without a single conventional press conference or carefully worded statement from a publicist. He used figure skating itself as the vehicle for processing the trauma, which is both the most artistically appropriate choice given the context and the most psychologically sophisticated response to public failure that any elite athlete has demonstrated in the modern era of sports, where everything is recorded, amplified, and immediately weaponized by an audience that has no accountability for the damage it causes. The broader significance of what Malinin did extends far beyond figure skating and far beyond the 2026 Olympics because he demonstrated something that the entire structure of elite athletics actively resists, which is that athletes can acknowledge mental health struggles publicly, can visualize their worst moments rather than hiding them, and can do so while remaining fully committed to competing at the highest level rather than using vulnerability as an exit ramp. Every young athlete who watched that gala performance and recognized something of their own experience in the way Malinin mimed scrolling through the hatred, the flinching, the hiding under the hood, received confirmation that the feelings destroying them in private are not weakness, are not disqualifying, and are not proof that they do not belong at the level they have worked their entire lives to reach. What the Quad God showed the world on February 21st in Milan is that the athletes who survive the worst moments on the biggest stages and choose to confront those moments honestly rather than pretend they did not happen, come back to competition carrying something that cannot be coached, cannot be trained, and cannot be manufactured through any preparation process available to any program anywhere in the world. He goes to Prague in 6 weeks as the most psychologically complete version of himself that has ever stepped onto competitive ice, because he has now felt what the maximum pressure of the maximum stage actually does to a human body and mind, survived it, processed it publicly, and announced his return, not with a statement, but with a backflip and a moment of deliberate silence that shook an Olympic arena to its foundation. The redemption competition begins March 23rd, and every competitor arriving in Prague already knows they watched something at the gala that changed the equation, because Malinin did not just survive his worst moment, he turned it into the most memorable performance of the entire 2026 Winter Games, and then announced he was coming to take back what the pressure had temporarily stolen from him. He is not broken, he is not defeated, he is not fragile in the way that the online commentary after February 13th tried to establish as the permanent narrative. He is the 2-time world champion who just visualized his collapse, landed a quadruple jump, did a band backflip, and stood in silence at center ice, daring every person watching to underestimate him one more time.